Should you doubt the existence of God? Let's think about it. Most people address the God question with two possibilities in mind: that there is a God or that there isn't one, failing to take into consideration the third possibility, that there are multiple gods. Which of these possibilities is most likely to be true can be determined by looking at state of affairs in the universe and seeing which of those theories they're most compatible with, which of those possibilities the state of affairs in the universe are compatible with. I like to look at living organisms, especially after hearing teleological or design arguments so many times coming from theists, mostly monotheists, of course, right? The idea from the perspective of monotheists, people who believe in one God, is that if you look at living organisms, they are seemingly designed. As to where a person like myself who doesn't believe in any gods looks at these living organisms and thinks this is more indicative of an unguided, naturalistic process of natural selection. So the polytheist, the person who believes in many gods, would ultimately share that idea with the monotheist. They would just believe that there were many designers. So regarding state of affairs in the universe, things that exist, living organisms, let's look at the relationship between predator species and prey species. If you were a member of a prey species, say squirrels, and you had multiple offspring, the offspring which was the fastest would be most likely to survive long enough to reproduce, pass off new offspring. So the fastest of your offspring is the most likely to survive. The fastest of its offspring is most likely to survive, because the ones that aren't fast enough are going to be getting eaten by predators, right? So as the fastest of the offspring keep reproducing, that species evolves to become faster. But as the prey species evolves to become faster, this puts pressure on the predator species to evolve to become faster, because in order for it to continue to survive, it has to be able to get faster to keep catching up with the prey. So this raises the question from the atheist to the monotheist: if there is one God, whose side is he on? Is he on the prey species side, or is he on the predator species side? Or is he on both of their side? Why are both of them continuing to get faster throughout their evolutionary history? I'd say throughout their evolution, they continue to evolve. From my worldview, as someone who doesn't believe in any gods and thinks this is an unguided naturalistic process, what we see in both of these species becoming faster is completely compatible with what you would expect to happen if what I believe was true. Now, the fact that organisms are evolving over time doesn't necessarily disprove the idea that they're designed, right? I mean, we could look at products as something that evolve over time. But in the case of the products being organisms, and you have these organisms that are prey species and these organisms that are predator species, and both of them are evolving over time and evolving in a way to compete with one another for their own survival and, ability to reproduce. We're to look at these organisms as designs and then take into consideration the fact that these designs are evolving in a way that seems to be competing with each other, or not seems to be, they are competing with each other. That seems more compatible with polytheism than it does with monotheism. So let's grant for the sake of the argument that living organisms are designs. If these living organisms that are designs are evolving to compete with one another, does that seem more compatible with the idea that these organisms have a single designer? Or does that seem to be better explained by the idea that these living organisms have different designers? Perhaps you have a god of the predator species and a god of the prey species. And perhaps every time the god of the prey species improves its design to be able to get away from the predator species, the god of the predator species now has more pressure to improve its design so that it can continue to eat the prey species. In the example that I just gave, speed was what gave the organism a higher likelihood of living long enough to reproduce, but that's not always the case. The predator-prey relationship in evolution isn't limited to animals. You could also look at this relationship existing with herbivores and plants. You would look at the herbivore as the predator in this relationship, but you have herbivores, you could even consider insects that eat certain plants, and those plants actually start to produce chemicals because those chemicals are toxic to the herbivores or the insects that are eating them. Well, then these predators, the herbivores or insects that are eating the plant, they have to evolve a way to detoxify or become immune to the chemical that plant is producing. So you could easily argue that there would be a god of the plants that's making the plants stronger, making the plants have different chemicals or stronger concentrations of chemicals to repel their predators, which would be these herbivores, these insects. And then you could argue that there's a god of the insects, a god of the herbivores, that's helping them evolve to either become more tolerant to those chemicals or detoxify them or find different food sources, whatever. But think about the fact that living organisms evolve in a way that could be described as an evolutionary arms race. Then consider the three possibilities we talked about at the beginning of this video. There are no gods, there is a god, there are many gods. I think the idea that there is one god is the least likely of these three possibilities. I think that there being no gods and this being an unguided naturalistic process is the best explanation. I think the second best explanation would be polytheism, that there are many gods, because I think, this could be better explained by there being different designers competing with each other. Now, given the idea that if there was a single designer, that would mean that that was the designer of the plants, the insects, prey species like zebras, gazelles, predator species like lions and tigers, that would entail that that designer was helping all of these species compete in their evolution against one another for their own survival and their own ability to reproduce. That is why I think monotheism is the least likely explanation for the state of affairs in the universe with respect to living organisms.